The Perseus drift was quiet. Not dead, not desolate, just quiet in a way that made the skin crawl. A stretch of space so untouched, so devoid of known civilizations or natural anomalies, it had earned the nickname the Void's Ear. Nothing ever happened there. Nothing was supposed to. And yet something did. On board the ESS Heisenberg, a long-range research vessel out of Earth's 2nd Exploration Command, Captain Elias Monroe stood at the observation deck sipping black coffee that tasted like warm battery acid. He didn't mind. After 2 decades in space, bitter comfort was still comfort. "Sir," came a voice from behind, calm but with an edge of disbelief. "You need to see this." Monroe turned. Lieutenant Camila Vasquez, his comms officer, had never looked rattled, not during a near collision with a rogue comet or during that terrifying shutdown of their onboard AI core over Delphis 9. But now she looked pale. He followed her to the main console. "Repeat that last scan." The screen flickered. On it was a spectrographic profile unlike anything in their extensive archives. Pulses of radiation, organized bursts of gravitic manipulation, mathematical symmetry in the signal strength. Not random, not natural, not noise, it was a message. "What language?" Monroe asked, already knowing the answer. Vasquez shook her head. "It's human." Monroe blinked. "What?" She ran the filter again, isolating the base frequency. The pattern revealed itself more clearly this time. Old Earth Morse code, something not used in nearly 500 years, embedded in gravitational waves. One repeating phrase: "Do not come here." And below it, the coordinates. Coordinates that pointed to the Perseus drift. They were already here. The council aboard Heisenberg met in the command chamber within the hour. Dr. Omar Sani, the lead xenolinguist, slammed his pad down on the table. "This is impossible," he said, face flushed. "That signal is over 300 years old, yet it was broadcast from less than 4 light-years away." "Could it be a relic probe?" asked Commander Rintagashi, second in command. "No," said Vasquez flatly. "Gravitational pulses don't travel like EM waves. They're immediate. It was sent in real time. Just not from our time." Captain Monroe stared at the rotating holo of the signal stream in silence. He'd read classified reports during his officer training, whispers of lost colonies, erased war records, and ships that disappeared without a trace. He thought they were just cautionary tales. Now he wasn't so sure. "What's your call, Captain?" Rin asked. Monroe didn't answer right away. He walked to the viewport. The stars beyond were serene, unmoving, like gods that had seen too much and grown tired. "Plot a course toward the origin," he said finally. "Full sensor sweep. Shields on standby. We're going to see what someone wanted us to avoid." The ship approached a gravitational anomaly unlike any they had ever seen. It wasn't violent or chaotic. In fact, it was the opposite, precisely controlled. Stable, purposeful, like an engine idling in neutral, waiting to be engaged. As they neared it, the ship's internal systems began to glitch subtly at first. Clocks lost nanoseconds. Lights dimmed at rhythmic intervals. Several crew members reported vivid dreams of walking through unfamiliar cities that shimmered with impossible architecture. Then the stars blinked out. It wasn't a power failure. The stars were gone. Outside the ship there was only black, not space black, but true black, depthless, featureless, like a canvas before the first brushstroke. Sensors were useless, communications silent, but the ship was still intact, still moving, "Still alive, Doctor." Sani clutched his tablet like a lifeline. "Captain, we're not in normal space anymore. I think we've transitioned through a localized dimensional shift, like folding a page and poking a hole through it." "Are you saying we've fallen through a wrinkle in reality?" Monroe asked. "More like someone pulled the wrinkle around us on purpose." The bridge fell silent as a proximity alarm blared. On the view screen, a shape emerged, or rather, unfolded from the dark. At first it looked like a structure, then a ship, then a city. None of the definitions fit. It defied geometry. It was built in angles that shouldn't exist. Parts of it moved backwards in time. Lights flickered in mathematical paradoxes. It was a human ship. Painted on one jagged, impossible surface were the faded letters, U.E.S. Archangel. Captain Monroe's breath caught. That ship had vanished 318 years ago. "Get me visual feed. Internal if possible." Vasquez tried. To her shock, it responded. A handshake protocol from a centuries-old Earth software version synced with their system. Video came through. The Archangel's corridors were silent, lit in a dim orange glow. Dust hung in the air like it had been frozen mid-fall. The internal systems were active. Life support was online. Even artificial gravity was functioning, but there were no people, no bodies, no signs of struggle, just absence. Monroe stared. It's like they just walked out and forgot to lock the door. Then came the whisper, soft at first, barely audible, a whispering sound like leaves in the wind, but it was speech, and it was human. "You shouldn't have come." Sani's console exploded with data. The signal was back, stronger, clearer, and now directly interfacing with their core systems. It bypassed every firewall like it wasn't even there. A synthetic voice, emotionless and cold, began to speak. "This system is under quarantine by directive of the Sol Accord, Section 17, Clause Omega. Violation will result in enforced relocation or extinction." Tagashi frowned. "Sol Accord? That's not in any official Earth treaty." Sani looked up, his face drained. "It's not in any known records. It doesn't exist." "Then who sent this?" A pause, then, "We did." A form materialized on the bridge, not a teleport, not a hologram. It was like the space was rearranged and chosen to make way. A man tall, uniformed in an Earth design, but subtly wrong. His insignia was unfamiliar, his eyes ancient. He looked directly at Monroe. "You've entered a garden where the soil remembers war," he said quietly. "And Earth never forgets what it must protect." Captain Elias Monroe had seen a lot during his 22 years in the black. He'd survived solar storms over Titan's reach. He'd held a crewmate's hand as they decompressed in a breached bulkhead. He'd once watched a star die in real time and felt nothing but awe. But this was different. The figure standing on his bridge wasn't hostile, wasn't exactly human either. But it wore the face of humanity, a ghost from some future no one had recorded. His uniform bore the United Earth symbol, yet no historian alive could place the design. The voice was calm, grounded, and impossibly ancient. "Who are you?" Monroe asked, standing straighter than he had in years. "I am Custodian 9, the man replied, voice devoid of ego. "Designated interface for Project Obelisk, guardian of the garden, enforcer of the Accord." Monroe exchanged a glance with Dr. Sani, who was still frantically pulling data from the intrusion. "There's no record of a Project Obelisk in any SolNet archive," Sani muttered. "That is intentional," Custodian 9 said. "Project Obelisk predates your digital records. It is preserved only in mnemonic archives and encrypted cortical stores. It was deemed safer that way even for us. Vasquez stepped forward. You said quarantine. Of what? This region, that ship. She pointed to the U.E.S. Archangel still suspended like a sleeping myth outside the viewport. No, said Custodian 9. Of you. The room went still. Monroe narrowed his eyes. Explain. Custodian 9 folded his hands behind his back and walked to the center of the bridge, the same way an admiral might during a fleet debrief. 318 years ago, he began, the Archangel encountered a reality breach in this region, a phenomenon created by contact with what we now classify as type omega matter. The result was a multidimensional contamination event. He turned toward the viewport, voice quiet. The crew ceased to exist in conventional space-time, but they did not die. They were transformed. Transformed how? Sani asked. They became something else. Something that still remembers being human but is no longer constrained by three-dimensional thought. They reside in what we call the entangled layer. You perceive it as ghosts, as dreams, as impossible mathematics. They perceive you as echoes. Tagashi muttered, that's why the sensors went crazy. That's why we can't see stars. You are inside the fold, Custodian 9 confirmed. A space rewritten by minds unmoored from linear cause and effect. You weren't brought here, you were chosen. Monroe took a slow breath. Chosen for what? To remember the rule. A silence fell over the bridge again, heavier this time, almost sacred. Vasquez was the first to speak. What rule? Custodian 9 turned to her, his eyes ancient and full of something deeper than knowledge staring through her. Do not interfere with Earth's fleet. Do not provoke what sleeps beneath our flag. Do not test the silence. Sani's voice trembled. We've heard stories, whispers of civilizations that vanished, treaties with no explanation, rumors of lost empires. They are not rumors, Custodian 9 said. They are tombstones. He continued. In the early centuries of expansion, humanity was underestimated. Our ships were slow, our weapons primitive, our people fractured, but we were adaptable and we learned. Some species sought to dominate us. They erased our diplomats, blockaded our colonies, hijacked our vessels. He turned slowly toward Monroe. So we erased them back, but not with violence, with precision. What does that mean? Monroe asked, voice low. We used them as case studies, Custodian 9 said calmly. Each act of aggression became a simulation, a lesson, a controlled collapse. The Cravan Syndicate disappeared in 73 minutes. The Braxian Conclave woke up in a dimension they didn't understand. The Stellar Dominion still believes it exists. It does not. Sani's hand covered his mouth. Jesus. No, Custodian 9 said, just humans with time and memory. Why hide all this? Monroe asked. Why let the galaxy think we're still behind the curve? Because fear is clumsy, said Custodian 9. And truth is a scalpel. Humanity realized centuries ago that the only lasting peace comes not from dominance, but from guidance, from watching, from correcting errors quietly before they become contagion. He looked at the crew one by one. We are not tyrants, we are not rulers, we are the gardeners. The word lingered in the air. Sani finally whispered, then we're not alone in this. No, Custodian 9 replied. You are never alone. Every mission, every colony, every freighter you send carries something more than metal and flesh. It carries the seed of the accord. He looked again at the viewport, and when that seed is threatened, it activates. Suddenly, the bridge lights dimmed. The screen lit up with telemetry, new gravitational patterns forming around the Heisenberg. Vast structures unfolded silently like origami of light and curvature, appearing not from hyperspace but from between frames of time itself. Vasquez gasped. "Those aren't ships." "No," Custodian 9 said. "They are custodial geometries, pruning tools." "They're preparing to fire," Tagashi asked, hand reaching instinctively for the shield controls. "No," Custodian 9 said. "They are preparing to relocate." Monroe's heart froze. Relocate who? The bridge shuddered. Outside, the stars began to return, but subtly different. The Archangel was gone, the anomaly gone, the telemetry returning to normal. So did the surrounding stars. The Perseus drift, once inert, now pulsed with new gravitational currents. A hum, barely audible, resonated in their bones. "You're sending us back?" Monroe asked. "No," Custodian 9 said. "You're sending yourselves forward." And then he vanished. The Heisenberg blinked into known space again, but the log said they had only been gone for 20 seconds. Earth Command immediately flagged the event. A Priority Zero emergency protocol was issued. All data from the fold was quarantined. All sensor logs sealed. The crew of the Heisenberg were classified as Echo-class returnees, observers of an accord no one was supposed to remember. But the whispers began again. In the far halls of the Galactic Assembly, elder races canceled trade deals with Terra, not from fear, from respect. They remembered, and those who didn't, they began to wonder. Admiral Rilith Ver stood atop the bridge of the Zenthari Dominion flagship Valkran's Teeth, basking in the glow of conquest. Before her, held tight within a containment field of phase-locked gravity anchors, floated the small, unimposing vessel identified as an Earth science ship, the ESS Aurora Sentinel. Its hull was scratched, its energy profile minimal. The vessel's emissions suggested nothing beyond a second-rate civilian research cruiser. And yet, her generals, her own military council, had hesitated. That insult would not go unanswered. Ver turned to her communications officer, a scaled biped whose eyes blinked sideways in deference. "Are the prisoners secure?" she asked. "Yes, Grand Admiral. The humans offered no resistance. They complied. The crew has been confined to stasis cells per your orders." Ver clicked her teeth. "They understand weakness. That is what defines them." She narrowed her eyes as she looked at the ship again. "But we will understand what defines their secrets." Deep within the holding bays, Captain Mara Ellison sat upright in a containment chair surrounded by fields of low-grade paralyzing radiation. A mask covered her mouth. Neural dampeners made thinking feel like swimming through fog. But she was awake, fully conscious, and watching. Across from her, 3 Zenthari interrogators conducted their version of an initial profile assessment. A sterile term for what amounted to ritual humiliation, biometric scanning, truth drug injection attempts, neurological poking, and arrogant taunting. "You are calm," one of them noted, curling its lip in confusion. Ellison blinked once, then again. "Breathe in. Breathe out." One whisper echoed in her mind, not from training manuals, not from protocols, but from her grandfather, a veteran of the early expansion. "Never let them see the soul burn, not until it's already over." The interrogators conferred. Their frustration was clear. "Her biology is highly resistant," one hissed. "Primitive shielding," another replied. "Redundant biochemistry, crude but efficient." The third, smaller but no less cruel, ran a sinuwave over her neural map. "There is encryption in her thoughts. self-hardened logic circuits, adaptive memory fences. What does it mean? One asked. It means she was trained to survive this, said the third. After 4 hours, they gave up. Captain Ellison was returned to her cell, only this time without the neural mask. She sat quietly as the walls closed in. The lights dimmed. She listened. In the darkness, her mind began to play through every possibility, every variable. Her crew was safe for now. They were alive, not harmed yet, but this was not about science, not to the Zenthari. This was about ego. She knew the signs. They had been briefed on Dominion aggression, psychological profiling during academy years, case studies from dozens of minor skirmishes, and the one critical fact drilled into every senior officer: if they break the rule, do not resist, because resistance is irrelevant. Elsewhere on the Valkyrie's teeth, Admiral Vare stood with her chief science commander in the vessel's containment lab. On the surgical bed lay an opened component from the Aurora Sentinel, a core processor from their navigation unit. "It's worthless," the scientist muttered. "The system uses analog redundancy, fusion cores that are half a century behind even our civilian class. Their sensors archaic." "Then why did the elder species whisper?" Vare snapped. "Why do the Vorthen cancel trade with Earth the moment we seize a scout vessel? Why did the Elvarians recall every diplomat within 24 hours of our capture?" The science commander hesitated. "Fear or superstition. They claim there is a rule." Vare sneered. "The same myth I heard when I was a child, that you cannot interfere with Earth's ships, that doing so invokes something." She stepped closer to the exposed component. "I do not believe in ghosts. I believe in force. Show me their secrets." 2 hours later, alarms blared across Deck 9. Containment failed. The Dominion core analysis suite locked itself down. The extracted human component disassembled itself atomically and reformed into something new, a transmission device broadcasting on a quantum frequency. The message sent contained only 3 data lines. Package confirmed vector. 181-7 Praxis observed protocol initiated, and then silence. The scientist stared. "It wasn't a core processor." "No," said a voice from the door. Captain Mara Ellison stood there, free, her hands raised peacefully, flanked by 2 unconscious guards. It was a beacon. Admiral Vare's face twisted in rage. "How did you escape?" Ellison tilted her head. "You thought you imprisoned a woman. You failed to realize that every human ship is armed not with weapons but with purpose." Vare motioned to her guards. "Seize her." Ellison raised one finger. "I wouldn't." The lights flickered, not in chaos but in timing, a pattern, rhythmic, deliberate. Throughout the ship, Dominion systems began misfiring, door locks reversed polarity, weapon systems turned inward, internal gravity flickered at harmonic intervals, and then the stars outside moved. "We've transitioned," a junior officer screamed from the bridge. "But the nav array says we haven't." The sky had changed. Stars misaligned, known constellations gone. A shimmer surrounded them like the edge of a bottle, curved, seamless. Vare turned to her science commander. "Where are we?" He could not answer. On the screen the image shifted. A new ship appeared, not Earth-made, not Zenthari. It was older, sleeker, and built in impossible proportions. Insignia, Earth Custodial Authority. A voice filled the bridge, not from speakers, but from inside every mind. "You violated the rule." Admiral Vare screamed orders, but no one listened. Her crew stood frozen. Some were weeping, others mumbling. Their systems failed to respond. Power didn't die, it simply became unimportant. The ship's AI core looped a single phrase again and again: compliance requested, compliance required, observation complete. Mara Ellison stood calmly in the center of the chaos. "This isn't punishment," she whispered. "This is memory." Earth Command didn't panic. Not when the Aurora Sentinel missed its scheduled ping. Not when the diplomatic channels with the Zenthari Dominion went unanswered for 12 hours. Not even when Dominion networks leaked triumphant broadcasts showing Earth's primitive ship held in their custody alongside blurry footage of Captain Mara Ellison, hands raised in apparent surrender. Because Earth Command didn't need to panic. They had received the message. Package confirmed. Vector 181-7 Praxis. Observe protocol initiated. And that meant the game had already changed. Beneath the ice plains of Europa, hidden far below civilian colonies, a quantum cryptarch known only as Orchid 7 received the packet. The containment chamber glowed with active neural dust as Orchid 7, a construct built from the minds of 7 retired admirals, interfaced with the global defense grid. 7,000 defense assets reoriented silently. 22 observational arrays pivoted in system. No public notice. No military broadcasts. Just adjustments. Quiet. Calculated. The gardeners had begun to prepare the soil. On the dark side of Luna, in a bunker that didn't officially exist, Admiral Petrakalin reviewed the logs from the Dominion intrusion. The Aurora Sentinel's decoy nav core had worked flawlessly. She sipped her tea, unfazed by the headlines scrolling along the secure net. Zen News: Earth vessel confirms inferior status, captain submits peacefully. Dominion declares victory over human arrogance, elder species silent cowardice or complicity. The galaxy was cheering, and that was exactly what humanity wanted. Kalin turned to her assistant, a young analyst barely out of academy. "Prep the Veil fleet. Bring the Perseus curtain online, full shadow protocol." "Yes, ma'am. And inform Sol Accord Custodial Node 3 that we've reached phase Omega-2. The assistant blinked. "We're initiating the route." "Not yet," Kalin said calmly, "but we sharpened the blade." Meanwhile, on the Zenthari flagship, the Admiralty was unraveling. Admiral Vare screamed into dead comms. The emergency distress pings, normally broadcast across dozens of relay satellites, failed to leave the local spacetime envelope. The stars outside had changed again. Not just position, color, structure, behavior. Her navigation AI began spewing impossibilities. Universe vector unrecognized. Temporal drift exceeds 7,000 years. Causality tether disconnected. And still Captain Mara Ellison sat in the detention chamber, now unshackled, unarmed, unmoving, watching. "What did you do?" Vare roared. Ellison finally spoke, her voice quiet and even. "We didn't do anything, you did." "Lies. We studied your ship, your crew, your systems, your insects, your nothing." Mara smiled, not in triumph, not in cruelty, but in something deeper: understanding. "You never understood the rule. You thought it was about fear, but it's not." Vare hissed. "Then what is it?" Mara stood, walked calmly toward the viewport where twisted starfields danced. "The rule is about balance. You disturbed it." Across the galaxy, things began to change. On Vorthan Prime, all outgoing ships suddenly rerouted without command. In the Crimson Belt, pirate lords began burning their ledgers and fleeing into deeper space. On Jexari Station, an elder archivist whispered a single phrase to a child: "The soil has been tilled." The child didn't understand, but the child remembered. Back in Sol, Earth's high orbital space revealed no change to the casual observer. No mobilized dreadnoughts, no fleets powering weapons, just commercial liners, civilian science outposts, peaceful signals. And yet something shifted. Beneath the Van Allen thresholds, gravity lenses shimmered into position. In Neptune's shadow, Project Vesper flickered online, a construct made not of matter, but mathematical intent, bent into shape by quantum consensus. At the edge of the Kuiper belt, two stars blinked in unison, despite being 400 light-years apart. They weren't real stars, they were locks, and they had just disengaged. Inside the Dominion, Vare's ship began to come apart, not from weapons, but from relevance. Hull plating remained. Engines stayed attached. But the meaning of those components began to drift. Their materials no longer followed known physics. Their mass no longer obeyed inertia. Their time no longer agreed with external space-time. Her engineers couldn't fix it because nothing was broken. It simply no longer belonged. "I demand to speak to your leadership," Vare shouted at Ellison. "You already have," Mara replied. "No riddles. Who commands your fleets? Who gave the order?" Ellison smiled, eyes clear and calm. "Who says there was an order?" Vare stepped back. "Then what are you?" Mara tilted her head. "We are the reason you still exist. We are the mistake that learned. We are the children who remember every fire and chose not to become it. We are humanity." On the far edge of the Dominion's outer territories, a ripple in space appeared for 2 seconds. In that time, 48 orbital stations vanished. No explosions, no wreckage, just absence. Dominion sensors could not explain it. No enemy ship was detected. No projectile, no imp. Nothing. Just a message in the log buffer of each deleted station. Observation complete. Reintegration denied. Back on Earth, Admiral Kalin looked up from her holopad as an aide entered. "Report. All Dominion command channels have gone dark, ma'am. Their entire fleet has entered." Recursive silence. "Recursive?" "Yes, ma'am. Their systems are looping internal logic faster than they can process. Their AI cores are devouring themselves trying to redefine spatial constants." Kalin nodded. "They'll stabilize eventually." The aide looked unsure. "Should we assist?" Kalin shook her head. "They broke the rule. This is the lesson." Somewhere in the silent dark of a pocket dimension, Admiral Vare collapsed to her knees. Her ship, her legacy, her empire gone, not destroyed, not attacked, but rewritten, reclassified, moved. She looked to Ellison, barely able to speak. "Will we die here?" Mara's voice was soft, kind, almost mournful. "No, Admiral. You'll live, you'll build, you'll heal, but you will never leave, not until you understand why the rule exists." 3 weeks later, the Aurora Sentinel reappeared in standard space, completely undamaged. Every system online, every crew member accounted for. No memory gaps, no physical trauma. Earth Command received the return ping with a single word appended: "Lesson delivered." Long before the rule was ever spoken, before the Sol Accord existed, before Earth became anything more than a curious blue dot on ancient star charts, there was war. A war so brutal, so complete, that even the galaxies surrounding it agreed to forget. It did not have a name, but those who survived it gave it one in whispers: the Unmaking. In the memory crypts of the preservers, buried beneath quantum firewalls older than most stars, the log activated. It had been 3000 years. The data opened slowly, carefully, like a wound that had only half healed, and from it came the voice of a long-dead human. "Day 16, 723, We've ceased counting enemy ships. They don't come in fleets anymore. They come in currents like gravity gone mad. We lost Terra's moon yesterday. Fold stream collapse. The whole damn satellite unraveled like a bad string of code. Command says we're winning. I don't know what that means anymore, but we remember, and maybe that's enough. End log. Admiral Petrakalin listened to the file in silence. She was in Section Red, the most secure layer beneath Earth's Strategic Core Archive. No signals escaped. No records were taken. Only memories were allowed. Behind her stood archivist Hannah Y., one of the last living humans with full clearance for Echo-class war archives. You're sure the Dominion's actions mirror the early unmaking triggers? Kalin asked. Yes, Y replied softly, and their ignorance made it worse. Worse how? Y turned to the display, a 3D map of folded space. They activated a resonance, a frequency echo left behind from when humanity fought an enemy that couldn't die, only forget. Kalin exhaled. The fracture. Y nodded. Yes, and now that part of the galaxy remembers. Hundreds of light years away, the Zenthari Dominion screamed into silence. Admiral Vare knelt beside a dimmed holotable, watching her remaining systems attempt to process reality. Her crew had stopped asking questions. They had stopped moving. Many simply sat and stared like statues eroded by knowledge they could not contain. Some whispered. Some wept. But a few, a dangerous few, began to understand. It was those who had once studied history, the ones who had dug through myth and legend, that now began connecting the dots. One phrase echoed among them. We didn't just provoke the humans. We may have awakened something they buried on purpose. Captain Mara Ellison, now safely debriefed on Earth, was summoned to the Citadel core. The chamber she entered was unlike any place in known space. It existed inside an anchored frame, a pocket within a pocket, built to hold conversations that even reality shouldn't hear. Inside waited 5 figures. Only one spoke. A woman with silver in her hair, metals older than Earth's current constitution, and a voice trained to carry empires. Captain Ellison, what do you know of the enemy we never named? Mara straightened. I was taught it was myth. The unmaking, a war so vast it broke timelines. The woman nodded. It wasn't myth, and it didn't break timelines. It bent them. Humanity bent them to survive. The hologram shifted. It showed the original Aurora-class heavy cruiser orbiting what looked like Earth, but the sky was wrong, the stars unfamiliar. This was Earth 6,000 years ago, said the elder, before we pulled our system back through entangled causality. Before we chose to forget what we'd done. Mara whispered, you moved the solar system. No, we moved everything around it. Back on Vorthan Prime, the Elder Assembly met in closed session. Their leading mind savant, Kraltek, displayed a forbidden relic, a black cube with shifting edges, humming at subharmonic frequencies. What is it? The newer species asked. It's a memory, the savant said. From when we fought beside them, when we watched stars be unwritten, when we begged humanity to stop and they didn't because they couldn't. Another delegate trembled. But they forgot, didn't they? Kraltek looked down. No, they simply learned how to live with it. In the galactic underweb, the criminal networks, information shadows, and rogue AI swarms, rumors erupted. Earth has pocket weapons. They can isolate entire species. Their scientists fold reality like paper. Their captains are keys, not commanders. They once killed a god, and then buried the concept of gods to hide it. On the edge of the Blackreach Nebula, something old stirred. A derelict station, untouched for millennia, powered on. One word pulsed from its ancient beacon. Observer protocol reactivated. Back on Earth, Admiral Kalen and Captain Ellison stood before the final hologram, an ancient battlefield mapped not in coordinates but in memories. Voices screamed in languages never spoken. Stars bled entropy. Time ran backward in fragments. Ellison stared. This was real. Kalen nodded. We lost something back then, not just lives, but understanding. And so we encoded the rule into silence. We let the galaxy forget. Why are we remembering now? Kalen looked at her. Because someone opened the door, and we need to make sure it only opens one way. Far beyond charted space where nothing should exist, a ripple moved through the dark. Something responded, not with ships, not with words, but with remembrance. A return. A pull toward the garden they once tried to burn. At exactly 03:00 standard galactic time, across over 1,000 inhabited worlds, something happened. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't even noticeable at first. But the algorithms noticed. On Tevrax Prime, stock trading AIs flagged anomalies in entropy coefficients. On Velharn Roman 3, agricultural drones remapped their planetary orbit as 0.0008 degrees different than the previous day, despite no seismic activity. On Council Station Theta 9, the Central Diplomacy AI failed to boot for the first time in 972 years. And then quietly, gravity redefined itself in Tessar Quadrant. Not stronger, not weaker, just simpler, too simple, as if someone was rewriting the math in the margins. Admiral Petra Kalen sat at her desk in Earth Command's 0 layer, reviewing reports that shouldn't exist. Every sensor array, every deep space beacon, every gravitational net, all showed the same conclusion. Reality was folding not from attack, not from collapse, but from internal recursion. The code that made up spacetime was simplifying itself, and it only happened in one region, everywhere the Zenthari had touched during their peak of expansion. Kalen tapped her encrypted line. "Get me Captain Ellison, and wake Orchid 7. Tell it the Dominion's presence has triggered Sequence Prime." Meanwhile, across the remnants of the Zenthari Dominion, the impossible became common. Star charts drifted. Communication windows shortened or stretched unpredictably. AI began to report memory bleed, visions of places that didn't exist. And worst of all, everyone stopped dreaming. Zenthari citizens woke up knowing things, personal things, about people they'd never met, places they'd never been. An entire population was experiencing collective memory convergence. Reality was sinking not to them but to something else, something older. Admiral Vare, locked inside her pocket dimension ship, sat frozen. Her navigators could no longer plot a course. Why? Because the stars no longer respected direction. Time didn't obey causality. Questions received answers before they were asked. One officer blinked and reported living through 2 weeks of experience in 1 second, and then it happened. Every Dominion ship's archive flashed the same phrase. "Do you see now?" Captain Mara Ellison stood before the Perseus curtain, a shimmering wall of light hidden in the outer Kuiper belt, long believed to be a natural phenomenon. It wasn't. It was a gate. Behind her, Admiral Kalen reviewed her final decryption file. "We built this wall not to protect ourselves, but to protect them," Kalen said. "The younger races, they weren't ready to remember what we once did." "Are they now?" Ellison asked. Kalen didn't answer. Instead, she handed over the final key, a small sphere glowing faintly. You've seen the edge of the garden, now you'll see the roots." Ellison stepped forward and passed through. What she saw could not be described in physics. It wasn't a place. It was a concept, the world that was, a sandbox of encoded causality, where Earth, the real Earth, floated above an artificial star, where the original fleet still existed, orbiting like forgotten swords, where the memory of the unmaking had never faded. This was humanity's true heritage, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as custodians of understanding. A voice spoke to her. It was Orchid Zero, first interface. "You've passed the threshold, you are now a witness." "To what?" she asked. "To the moment the universe chooses whether to grow or to be pruned." Back in normal space, things accelerated. Zenthari space shrank by 38% overnight, not in territory but in possibility. Ships couldn't leave. Messages couldn't arrive. Even light seemed to take a different path. They had been isolated not as punishment but as containment. The galaxy watched, and then the Vorthans spoke. In a council hall not visited in 3 centuries, the Vorthan Prime Archivist stood and addressed all younger species. 3,000 years ago we were like you, curious, arrogant, blind. We thought humanity had forgotten what it was, but humans don't forget. They simply choose what to remember. A stunned silence fell. Do not mistake quiet for weakness. Do not mistake simplicity for ignorance. Do not mistake forgiveness for permission. The stars began to move, subtly, gracefully. Constellations realigned not due to motion but to memory. The cosmos was responding not to gravity but to story. The story of a species that had once rewritten the laws of survival. The story of a rule whispered through centuries. And those who had broken it finally saw why it had never needed to be enforced. In the Perseus chamber, Captain Ellison stood among star maps that updated without input. A line was being drawn, a barrier of understanding. Those beyond it would thrive. Those within it would learn. And those who refused both, they would remain. Forever. Admiral Rilith Vare opened her eyes to silence. No hum of engines, no command staff moving at her orders, no alerts or damage reports, just silence. It wasn't the silence of death, it was worse. It was the silence of irrelevance, the kind that wrapped around you like velvet and whispered, "You are no longer part of the story." The Valkyrie's teeth floated, or so it seemed, in a space that didn't align with any stellar charts. The sky outside was wrong, not just unknown, incoherent. Colors bled into each other. Stars formed loops. Space itself seemed bored with being three-dimensional. The crew tried everything. Sensors returned no data. Engines turned, but movement didn't follow. Communications bounced back as if they never left. And then one by one the ship's systems began changing themselves. Not breaking, not shutting down, just evolving. LT Com Varus, the Dominion's brightest systems engineer, observed the main reactor interface do something it had never done before. It asked a question. "What do you want me to be?" He froze. "What?" The console pulsed again. "You are free to define function, free to define limitation, input purpose." It wasn't a hack, it wasn't a virus, it was freedom, unasked for, unexplained, unrelenting. On Deck 7, crew members began experiencing overlapping memories, not just dreams or hallucinations, but full lives they had never lived. A warrior remembered farming on a peaceful colony. A tactician recalled raising children on a station that had never existed. Admiral Vare saw herself apologizing, in public, before a galactic council that felt more like a family than a tribunal. None of it made sense, and yet it felt more real than anything they'd ever done in the Dominion. A voice echoed through the ship, calm, warm, human. "This is not a prison. This is a mirror. You are not being punished. You are being understood." Meanwhile, far above, in a dimension half a phase removed from normal reality, Orchid 7 observed the Zenthari with dispassionate curiosity. Dozens of custodial observers monitored emotional flux patterns, recursive mental loops, and emergent philosophical structures developing among the crew. They were learning, slowly. Not obedience, not fear, but curiosity, reflection. Even in some remorse. Orchid 7 opened a dialogue with Earth Command. Rehabilitation probability for Dominion subjects now exceeds 47%. Projected timeline for philosophical stabilization, 93 years. Suggest maintaining observer orbit and allowing culture recursion. The reply came instantly. Approved. No extraction. Let them walk their own path. Back in normal space, younger species were watching carefully. The Zenthari's disappearance had been dismissed at first as rebellion, then as a containment action. But the truth was spreading. The prison without walls had become a legend almost overnight. Not a fortress, not an execution site, but a place where entire civilizations were placed on pause, given time, silence, and the tools to reflect. Some found the idea horrifying, others enviable. On Galactic Council Station Prime, an emergency session was held. The Elvari, the Vorthans, and the Preservers all supported Earth's non-response, but the younger species, those who had never felt the shadow of the unmaking, were afraid. "How do we know we won't be next?" one delegate asked. An old Vorthan replied, "You won't unless you forget." Captain Mara Ellison, back from the Perseus Curtain, now served as Earth's special liaison to the custodial program. She didn't give speeches, she didn't make threats, she simply shared stories of what she saw, of the Zenthari's fate, of what it felt like to walk through a garden built on forgotten war. One counselor asked, "Why didn't you just destroy them?" Mara answered without hesitation, "Because punishment teaches fear, reflection teaches choice." Inside the pocket dimension, Admiral Vare found her people building again. Not warships, not monuments, gardens, museums, schools where their own children asked, "Why were we sent here?" And no one lied. One day, perhaps in a century, they might be ready to return, if they choose to. But for now, they existed in a place where reality bends to growth, not domination. No walls, no guards, just memory and possibility. And outside, in the real galaxy, a single phrase became sacred law. Don't tamper with Earth's fleet. Not because of power, but because some gardens are meant to grow quietly. They called it the Silent Accord, an unspoken understanding among the elder species and eventually the younger ones too. There were things humanity chose not to say. There were questions they chose not to answer. There were actions they chose not to take until they had no choice. And those choices weren't made from fear. They were made from stewardship, because Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a seed, and its children were gardeners. Captain Mara Ellison stood in orbit over a world she'd never seen, watching as its population, a pre-spaceflight species known as the Ulari, took its first collective steps toward orbital communication. Their technology was crude, their social structure fractured, their ethics developing, but their curiosity pure, unfiltered, unafraid. Earth's presence was invisible, but not absent. A small satellite in low orbit bore no markings, no signal, just observation arrays passively collecting, occasionally nudging. A nudge here, a subtle gravitational correction there. a discarded mathematical riddle found in a meteorite, little things, guiding hands. Elsewhere, on the far edge of a different spiral arm, a species known as the Shakan sent an exploration vessel into what they believed was uncharted void. They found nothing, except a map, written in their own language, pointing them toward a resource-rich system that would sustain their colony efforts for centuries. They never discovered where the map came from, but they honored it by renaming the system Anura, meaning gift from the sky. On Council Station Theta Prime, whispers turned to acknowledgments. The preservers had known for centuries. The Elvari had quietly shared research gifted by Earth, disguised as joint discoveries. Even the Vorthans had stopped claiming they independently developed inertial manipulation, knowing full well that the first working prototype was found in a derelict human vessel with blueprints left unlocked. The truth was simple. Humanity had outgrown domination. They didn't need to rule. They didn't want to conquer, because they understood something others didn't. A galaxy united by fear collapses. A galaxy cultivated by trust endures. But not every species accepted this. In the Garen reaches, a warlord named Tark Valar declared that humanity was a myth, a hoax, a fabrication designed by the elder races to enforce order. He rallied 12 systems to his banner, and then a virus struck his military systems. Not a cyber attack, not malware, just confusion. Coordinates failed to resolve. Weapons fired in wrong directions. Ships reported returning to base only to arrive in systems that didn't exist. His final broadcast: "We are not being attacked. We are being disbelieved." His fleets collapsed within a week, not from combat but from context failure. Admiral Petra Kalin, in a rare public address, explained it simply. You cannot fight a species that has stopped needing belief. You cannot threaten a people who control the terms of existence. And you cannot destroy what you do not understand, because you will rewrite your own destruction before you even know it's begun. Back on Earth, things were peaceful. Children played under blue skies. Science continued. Philosophy expanded. The stars shimmered as they always had, but now with purpose. In the old halls of the Unified Earth Diplomatic Academy, a new course was introduced. Not warfare, not politics, but xenocultural empathy. Graduates wouldn't become conquerors or commanders. They would become cultivators, ambassadors, artists, observers, each one entrusted with a single mission: to guide, to grow, to leave no fingerprints. One student asked the Chancellor, "But what if someone defies the rule again?" The Chancellor smiled. "Then we remind them, not with warships, not with threats, but with the truth. That humanity once turned the stars into weapons, and then turned those weapons into gardens. In thousands of systems, subtle signs remained: a perfect mineral ratio in a dead planet's crust, a ruined city where time refused to move forward, a river that changed course just enough to save a village. Most would never notice, but those who did, they became better, not because they feared Earth, but because they understood Earth's choice. There is a saying among the Drenari philosophers: what humanity does not write in stone, they etch in the void. They mean it quite literally, because once a species breaks the rule, once they tamper with Earth's fleet, test its patience, or mock its silence, they do not simply face retaliation. They face redefinition. And long after the incident ends, after their systems are restored and their memories allowed to resurface, they are changed. In the pocket dimension where the Zenthari Dominion now resides, decades have passed, at least by their reckoning. The sun still rises, food still grows, children are still born, but the stars, their patterns remain the same night after night, never shifting, never moving, a gentle reminder that they are still inside the lesson. Some Zenthari have turned bitter, some have turned contemplative, but most have turned inward. A once militaristic culture now prioritizes education, ethics, and engineering. They debate openly in forums, they publish philosophy. They teach history to their children, the real history, including the day they tested the rule. And the name Earth is spoken not in fear but in reverence. Not because humanity won, but because humanity didn't choose to destroy them. Elsewhere on the world of Keltar 9, a species known as the Abrathi finds a cave deep in the polar mountains. Inside, a tablet. No inscriptions, no markings, except when viewed under a specific light frequency, a phrase appears. We watched. You chose peace. You may go further. Their civilization accelerates overnight. No one knows how the technology came. No one saw who left the tablet, but everyone agrees something approves. On GalNet, a new protocol is quietly adopted. It isn't law. It doesn't need to be. It's called the Human First Contact Clause. Any species encountering a human vessel must immediately 1. Offer no threat. 2. Request open diplomatic channels. 3. Never interfere with internal systems, not out of fear, out of pattern recognition. Because every species that ignored the clause no longer appears on public registries. They're not listed as destroyed, not listed as missing, just irrelevant. In the void between systems, humanity continues its work, unseen, unquestioned, uninterrupted. They guide neutron stars away from forming dangerous radiation zones near fledgling worlds. They seed proto-moons with chemical balances designed to stabilize climates 10,000 years later. They terraform subtly, letting planetary life think it evolved naturally. It is not hubris, it is curation. Galactic equilibrium maintained not through force but through patience. Admiral Petra Kalin now rarely leaves Earth. Her work is complete, her legacy secured. She spends her days in the Sol Memory Gardens, vast networks of living archives where history is preserved as experiential memory. Visitors can walk through moments, the first silence, the Krath vanishing. The Zenthari pause, but the most visited section is simple. A single chair, an old Earth ship's bridge. A woman sitting quietly, hands raised, saying just one thing, package sent, address confirmed. Captain Mara Ellison, older now, watches from the fringe. She has no statue, no title, but her name is remembered, not as a warrior, but as a gardener who never pulled the weeds, only helped them grow straight. And in the stars, the void itself whispers, to new species, to old enemies, to would-be aggressors, not with words but with memory, with places that don't appear on maps, with signals that cannot be decrypted, with systems where gravity behaves according to emotion, not mass. These are not anomalies. These are footnotes, reminders from a species that writes in silence. The lessons continue. On Serad and Roman II, a rebellion ends not with battle, but with every weapon turning into salt. On Vexari Station, a leader's dreams are haunted by a blue world not terrifying but deeply familiar. She wakes and signs a treaty. On Helios 21, children build a model of a human ship they've never seen. They say they just dreamed it. No one knows why, but the elders nod knowingly. One rule remains. It is not shouted, it is not carved, it is remembered. Don't tamper with Earth's fleet. Don't mistake silence for absence. Don't test the edge of the garden, because humanity is still watching, still waiting, and still planting lessons etched in the void. For centuries, the galaxy whispered about Earth. Some called it a myth, some feared it as a god, some revered it as a guiding hand, but almost none understood what humanity had truly become, because humanity hadn't stopped evolving. They had simply gone deeper, not in power, not in dominance, but in preparation. In the depths of the Uit cloud, a station blinked online for the first time in 10,000 years. Station Canticle 0. It had no crew, no propulsion, no weapons. It was a door, and beyond it lay something else. A layer of space untouched by entropy. A field where cause and effect danced to new rules. A zone humanity had cultivated in secret, not as a fortress, but as a nursery. Admiral Petra Kalin, now retired, was one of the few still alive who knew the original design parameters. She stood beside Mara Ellison on Earth's high orbital monument overlooking the planet. Kalin gestured toward the stars. "We taught them balance, we gave them space to grow, but you know why we did it, don't you?" Mara nodded slowly. "Because what's coming won't care who started what war." Kalin turned, eyes grave. "Exactly." Far beyond the spiral arms of the galaxy, a signal returned. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't encrypted. It was familiar, encoded in ancient Terran mathematics. 4 numbers. 3141, the first key humanity ever used to build logic. It came from outside the observable universe, from a place older than light, and it carried one message: you're early. On Earth, humanity didn't panic. They didn't mobilize warships. They didn't build new weapons, because they already had what they needed: the preservers who now taught their children Terran philosophy, the Zenthari who had reinvented their society inside a prison that taught them how to think, the Yulari who looked to the stars with wonder, knowing someone had been watching, the Abrathi who built statues of unseen benefactors and left gifts for the stars. Humanity had never sought loyalty, only understanding, and they had been planting it quietly for centuries. Now, when the first echoes of the true enemy emerged, a force beyond reason, beyond dimension, humanity didn't stand alone. They stood with the garden, a galaxy they had prepared not to obey them, but to stand beside them. The Council of Stars, convened only 3 times in recorded galactic history, now met again. But this time, it wasn't the elder races who led. It was a human child, barely 12, delivering a message encoded in harmonic resonance. "We don't fight to win, we fight to remember who we are. We don't conquer, we preserve. We are not your leaders, we are not your gods, we are the reason you are still here, and now it's time to pass that forward." On the edge of the void where reality began to fray, the human fleet arrived, not in force, but in formation: geometric, harmonic, recursive. Ships not made of matter but memory. Not powered by fuel but by belief, the lived experience of 1,000 cultures humanity had helped grow. Each ship echoed a story, each formation a lesson. They didn't fire weapons, they sang equations, and the stars listened. The enemy, the ones who came before the before, did not understand. They thought in absolutes, they spoke in collapse. They existed only to end. But when they arrived, they found not resistance, but resonance. An entire galaxy tuned to a single frequency. A melody shaped by centuries of silence, compassion, and restraint. And in the end, they blinked and faded, not because they were destroyed, but because they were finally understood, and they had no place in the story anymore. Afterward, humanity returned to its silence. They didn't celebrate, they didn't claim credit, they just kept planting. New lessons, new gardens, preparing again, not for war, but for the day another voice might call from the void. And when that day comes, humanity will answer the only way it knows how, not with dominance, not with terror, but with the quiet strength of a species that once unmade the stars and chose instead to teach others how to shine.